Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the wonderful film Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning with the visual effects team. We are talking to the visual effects supervisors from ILM, including Alex Wuttke, Simone Coco, Jeff Sutherland, and Neil Corbould. And maybe starting with you, Alex, I was just interested in kind of the early conversations with Christopher McQuarrie, the director of Mission Impossible, in starting to look at the history of this franchise, because obviously the audience have a certain idea visually of what these films look like, what they feel like as an audience member. But every single film is always kind of elevated on what's been done before, and especially
Right.
building on new technologies. And so I was just very interested in what those early conversations looked like in creating the roadmap and the blueprint for this one.
Yeah, I mean, we started off having conversations early in 2019, so quite a while ago now. The first conversations were really about sort of location. Chris was in the midst of doing his kind of world tour with Jake Myers, his producer. And they were kind of going around all these different global locations, and they were looking for interesting places to stage action sequences. So we talked a lot about the philosophy of that. He was really interested in finding some sort of terrain or some new terrain that would enable something different, in a chase. We were talking about that. We talked about, once he'd decided on this sort of terrain, what kind of different ways we could shoot this, what sort of interesting and novel ways we could shoot this would be. Obviously, Tom likes to do his own stunts, so that's kind of first and foremost, and really takes kind of center stage when it comes to staging action. A lot of it is how do we take the camera with Tom, through these kind of really interesting sort of ideas for action sequences that he was having. So yeah, early doors conversations, right? Cut straight to the chase. How are we going to do something new that hasn't been seen before?
I love that. And Simone, maybe I'll come to you with the next question. I was interested because obviously Christopher McQuarrie and Tom, they love to film so many things in camera. That stunt work is really him doing the stunts, as Alex was saying. And I was interested in working on the visual effects where you're really kind of like enhancing and evolving scenes, how having a lot of the stunt work in particular filmed in camera really actually helps you as a team in terms of what you're then building on top of it.
Well, definitely, it's amazing because you need the main thing with Macquarie and Tom is that what they want to do is try to it's trying to make the visual effects invisible, so need to be part of the story. It doesn't need to distract the audience. So what he's trying to do is just to make sure that we never, touch the performance of Tom, and making sure that everything around it feels seamlessly integrated into, especially the jump, integrated into the mountain and the visual effects.
Yeah, I love that. And Jeff, I'm going to come to you next. And I love the way that there's a lot of visual mapping that goes on location, so that you can then, when you need to, kind of utilize that footage for like everything that you're building into frames. And if there's something where, say like the train sequence where a lot of it's filmed on a train, but then there's certain things that have to be done on a backlot. I was just interested in what that process looks like in terms of the visual mapping that happens on location and how that really helps you once you're in the post-production stage of the film.
Yeah, I mean, because of the way how you're describing the way the things are shot and how Alex was describing it, it's like, a lot of it becomes kind of reacting to what's shot a little bit. So it kind of makes it a little bit, in a way, it's kind of a more organic way of putting the shots together because every shot has got its own kind of needs and sort of slightly different from the one before. And in, a show that might be kind of all CG sequences, it gets a little bit more assembly line with like, you're building the environment. This goes on that, what every shot's going to need, and you kind of put it together in kind of a predictable way. And this you're kind of reacting to it. It's like you might have, you have beautiful location photography you have to kind of tie into and match to. But then, but it's shot, for these couple of shots, it's on a backlot or something, and you have to, and we take all the sort of surveyed data, we kind of recreate the environment as best we can. And then, it has to cut together so the audience isn't conscious of that jump.
Absolutely. And Neil, so much of why I think a lot of Mission Impossible works is it's taking these very heightened circumstances, but kind of visually telling the story in a way that feels very realistic and attainable, because you have these real locations, because the movements of things on screen all feel very real. When things are moving through the train, it's real world objects. The submarine feels very connected and very real. And so what is the experience of working on visual effects where in essence you have these real set locations and you're just finding those little touches of where things can feel a little bit more heightened and a little bit more intense for some of the tension and some of the action of the film?
Well, I think with the practical side, it's really, especially with the train sequence, there was 9 different rigs to, big hydraulic rigs and train carriages and it's not like he's doing this stuff on the ground either. A lot of the rigs were like 8-9 meters up in the air. So it gives you that feel as well that you're actually up there with outside. So the thing with working with Tom and McHugh is that they want as much real stuff as they can. So we literally built right at the beginning. McHugh said, "I want to crash a steam train." So you can't buy a steam train to crash, and plus they weigh about 160 tons. So we had to build it, from scratch. And then he said, "Yeah, but I want to blow a bridge up, and I want to drive the train off the bridge." So it just kept escalating and escalating. Oh, by the way, I want the prop train that we're building to go on a public railway. So that opened up another can of worms that we had to certify our steam train to go on a public track. So they certainly keep us on our toes to get the look that they want.
I love that. And in starting to talk about, some of the specific scenes that have visual effects that really just enhance everything so wonderfully, I wanted to start by talking about the submarine sequence at the beginning, because I was interested in the facet of thinking about realistically, what would this look like? What would this feel like?
Right.
But then again, also, okay, maybe we can allow for like a little bit more visibility into the water for the sake of storytelling, because the audience probably haven't had the experience of going down in a submarine. And so how did you kind of all figure out visually how you wanted to explore that particular sequence?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. It's kind of, the observable reality. If you were to actually kind of go down into the, below the Arctic, the kind of depths we're talking about, and try and film a real submarine, light falls off literally within meters. So it would be pitch black, which doesn't obviously make for a very exciting sequence. So the way that we looked at it was, there's not much visual reference either, for precisely those reasons. So the audience doesn't really have any sort of reference point. There's no sort of real keystone visually for them to look at this. But what people are really familiar with is some of the old classics like Hunt for Red October and Crimson Tide, movies like this. So that almost becomes the observable reality that you're kind of pinning everything off of. It also helps that it's one of Tom's favorite films, Crimson Tide, and McHugh loves Hunt for Red October. So it felt like a natural fit to kind of gun for that in terms of an aesthetic. We originally wanted to shoot that in the style that they would have shot those things, back in the day, kind of big miniatures, fill up a warehouse with mineral smoke and big model movers, and kind of pull these great big models through these volumes. But because of what the submarine had to do in the sequence, that became logistically just impossible. So we kind of went with a digital route. But when we went that route, we sort of tried to make it in the style of these old films. So, we kind of built a 3D volume of smoke, and we kind of built our digital submarine and pulled our digital submarine through that digital smoke. So it's kind of like an analog of the kind of the old school model miniature shoot. And it kind of gave us a really nice look and a really nice aesthetic. And, everyone seemed pretty happy with that.
Yeah, look, it looks great. And, with that sequence as well, I wanted to ask you all about just the intricacies that come even into just working with like the movement of water, those sequences where we're seeing the submarine move through the water, we're seeing kind of like the missiles launch from it. And then also just thinking very specifically about shadow and light underwater, because it's obviously very different to when you're doing visual effects for above land pieces as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of the fluid dynamics kind of come into play. There's very specific sets of simulations that you run to sort of get those qualities. All the bubbles, the kind of the cavitation on the torpedoes. Way that works underwater, but also subtleties of the way that the camera should move underwater. You can't move a camera physically through water very quickly, and you can't do these kind of nice whip pans, and you can't do all sorts of things. And it's hard to keep the camera stable. So all of that, we're replicating all of that and pushing that into the way that the camera moves and the way that you frame shots as well. And it's kind of one of these really subtle bits of reality that sort of fool you into thinking that you're actually underwater. So yeah, it's kind of all important.
Yeah. And also I was interested for all of you as well in just there's throughout the movie, there's multiple sequences of kind of like the face masks of another character that we see lifted on and off at different moments. And I was interested in just how those were filmed practically on site to then be enhanced with effects to make it feel like a very realistic thing that's happening in one swift motion. Because I'm sure that what was filmed wasn't just a quick swift motion that looked perfect in take one.
I mean, Jeff, you could probably talk to this. I mean, in terms of shooting, it's kind of, we were lucky enough to have our A camera operator, Chunky Richmond, who's a human motion control machine. So, we do these in multiple passes, often on a steady cam, because that's the language of the movie. But in terms of putting all those things together, Jeff, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, those are really fun ones to work on. I think the artists actually like working on those the best too, because they're so iconic. But the interesting part about them, or some of the interesting parts about them, is just that they're all kind of their own puzzle in a way. And even though you kind of think of them as, all right, this is a mask pull shot or whatever, they're all in different contexts, different amounts of motion on the camera maybe, or different kind of other things that kind of work into the context of the shot. So you end up kind of approaching them as in a unique puzzle, and it kind of gives the artist a chance to explore it too a little bit. So you're kind of working with the artist to kind of work that out. But yeah, I mean, it starts with shooting the elements very carefully to kind of give you the best chance of having them work out. And then there's like a combination of different techniques, I think, that go into it. There's sometimes there's digital reprojections that you do. Sometimes there's just sort of kind of old school tricks, like you look over here while something's happening over here, that kind of stuff. And it just makes for fun shots to kind of put together. But
like a technological magician.
Yeah, there's definitely no kind of single approach to those, I think.
That's so great. And Neil and Simone, I wanted to also ask about just computer technology within the film, because you kind of want it to feel slightly futuristic, but also attainable and believable in the world that we live in the present. So even just when you're coming up with the screens that they're looking at, or the software that they're working with and how they're interacting with that, what goes into those sorts of creative choices for you both?
Oh, that's the part that I did it, but you need to be always, up to date to everything that is out there. I think Jeff did you do just some of the in London?
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously a lot of graphic elements in these movies too, that we're kind of working with all the time. There was another house that was providing the graphics to us. I'm just thinking, like, one of the kind of themes in the movie was kind of how they had to go back to this old technology, to kind of, because of the entity was making it, so there's a big sort of historical kind of analog vibe to a lot of what's going on in some of the sequences. And one of the most challenging kind of sequences in terms of dealing with graphics and everything was when they're using like a whole array of old CRT monitors as kind of like to basically make up their kind of graphic interface for the technology that they're using. You know, you kind of talk about it, it's sort of almost as if it's like, oh, it's a monitor replacement shot, except there's like, you know, 200 monitors in the frame, and the image plays across all of them, and you have to make them all feel like they're analog technology. So we had fun doing that. It was like, we basically, you know, we got the graphics mapped across the whole wall of monitors that we were putting them on, and then we would kind of individually treat them to kind of make them feel like the old analog monitors that they were playing back on.
Yeah, and I'm not sure which of you guys worked on the luggage handling sequence with Simon Pegg's character, but the effects on that are incredible because it really was just, you know, up close camera, and then there's an entire backdrop of luggage moving everywhere that you guys created. You know, and you have to have so many things at top of mind, like making sure that if this luggage was over here and it's on that conveyor belt, that it's like moving in the right motion, and you're not repeating bags everywhere, and what's the lighting at different places in the room. So I was just interested in some of the creative challenges in creating a scene like that, that on the surface potentially seems like it could be more simple and straightforward, but actually is incredibly complex.
Yeah, I mean, actually, kind of anecdotally, we you know, we were given access to a working luggage facility in an airport in Abu Dhabi that was under construction. And you know, it's an amazing bit of machinery. You know, there's conveyor belts absolutely everywhere. It's vast. There's a huge amount of moving parts within it, and you know, the original plan was that we were going to go and shoot, you know, right in the middle of this complex, with the only problem being that, you know, most of the crew kept getting lost. So you know, we'd turn up, and you know, camera were sort of, you know, 500 meters in one direction, and you know, the grips were somewhere else, and no one knew where anyone else was. So we had to kind of abandon that as a principle pretty quickly. But you know, what it did allow us to do was to kind of do a bit of a survey of that whole working facility, so we could scan and photograph all of the various constituent parts, and then when we got back to the stage, you know, we could shoot Simon against a small section of that machinery the art department would construct. But then, you know, the good folks at ILM, Jeff and Simone, they sort of built this amazing kit of parts that enabled us to create this big maze of machinery around Benji, and it was, yeah, it's quite the feat. It was huge, I think, in the end, the extension.
Yeah, it was pretty big. Yeah, and we had to build as well all the belts. So the animator had to do, you know, to animate all the belts and the bags going on top of it, and yeah, it was quite a good challenge.
What was kind of the biggest challenge for you in working on that, Simone?
On the movie, or on
that particular sequence?
I just make it believable and realistic. You know, that was the biggest challenge.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk about the car chase sequence because, again, I think you all do such a wonderful job at just really elevating the tension of scenes like that and finding those little fine-tuned visual moments as much as the bigger pieces. But I was interested in filming the sequence where the car is going down the steps, because the car chase was very much filmed on location with streets closed off, but that was the one space that you couldn't actually film on location for. So I was interested in you know, how that was shot and how visual effects really played a huge hand in that part of the sequence, because it has to believably match the entire rest of that sequence in the movie to work.
Yeah, I mean, that was a sort of a huge joint effort, and we should really talk about you know, we should talk about Neil's electrified Fiat at some point, but because that's really the star of that whole sequence. I mean, the Spanish steps, the actual steps, you're not allowed to even sit down on them because they're protected. You know, there's a carabinieri down at the bottom with a whistle who blows the whistle every time a tourist dares to sit down or, you know, whatever. So actually sending some real cars down it was impossible. But art department constructed their own version on the back lot at Longcross, divided into two halves, and they kind of this beautiful amount of finish on them, you know, with the kind of replicating all of the marble and all the detailing within it. It was absolutely beautiful. But for us, it was really just you know, it was a big extension number. We had to take very accurate surveys of the entire area. So that we, you know, Jeff and his team could rebuild a digital version that fitted within the look of, and the aesthetic of the whole sequence, and it had to be, because everything else around that sequence is completely real. It's quite a high bar. You take one misstep with your digital work, and it gets noticed very quickly. So it's a real testament that he managed to pull it off.
Yeah. And Neil, what were the intricacies at hand for your work on that sequence?
Well, it's building the Fiat 500. So they're sort of well-known cars that they don't go very fast and they're not very reliable because of the age of them. So we had to basically strip it all down, build a new chassis, and then we used a 500 brake horsepower electric vehicle motor to power it. And in the beginning, it started off as a completely different sort of vehicle. It was supposed to be a bit of a tongue-in-cheek that it's a Fiat 500. And when we showed Tom and McHugh the test of the car, I mean, it was so frighteningly fast that they sort of rewrote the sequence around the car. The car became a character. I mean, this thing, it would be a Lamborghini off the line. It was so fast, and it looks like, it feels like some of those scenes are sped up, but they're not. That's how fast the car could really go. And then we built some various rigs. So when where we had some roof mount rigs, and we had some rear driving rigs when they're going through the tunnels. We had a rolling rig, so that they were when they were in the car. So we made it slightly bigger, so because obviously they're very tight inside the Fiat 500. And once you start rolling, you can't really move that much. So again, it was one of those. It was a tricky sequence because there were so many little elements. So I think we had a total of about 7 or 8 Fiats that all did slightly different things. So it was a tricky sequence, but it looked great. I think everyone did a fantastic job on it.
Yeah, it's such a great car choice for a sequence like that.
I was going to say, one of the kind of cool things about the sequences is it's like an old kind of charming car with sort of bucket of bolts kind of idea there, and a lot of times when it was going down steps or going across bumps or cobblestones and that sort of thing, the whole thing just kind of vibrated. Like the hood, the bonnet was like jumping up and down, the doors were going in and out and everything. And very often for these sequences, the car is kind of covered with, various camera rigs that it becomes our job to kind of, we had a digital version to kind of help get rid of those camera rigs and everything. But when the car is kind of all loosely put together like that, we had to kind of build all that into our model and kind of, so that it made it tricky for us, but it was worth it in the end for the story.
It looks great. And I'm not sure which of you were working specifically on the stunt where it's basically Tom on the motorbike kind of going off the edge of the cliff and then parachuting down. But that was obviously an incredibly intricate sequence for everyone who worked on this film, and really just figuring out how to problem solve and approach doing something that hadn't been done before in a very practical way. And I know that there were a lot of kind of test runs of like each facet of what that looked like. But in terms of effects, the camera, it really is still focused on Tom and his performance in that moment. But the ramp that he was on obviously had to be flat for safety. So then you guys came in and really added a lot of kind of like the granular elements of the ground around that, and even just adding like a little bit more suspension to the movement of the bicycle that would reflect that. And so I was interested in some of the creative challenges and really just trying to approach something that was so unique and such a new type of sequence to create for a film.
Yeah. I mean, Simone, one for you.
Yeah, very challenging. I think that was one of the first shots that came ILM, and probably one of the last to leave the building, because it's such a big stunt from Tom that we need to make sure that it was, perfect to his eyes, to McQuarrie eyes. The biggest challenge was to making sure that that ramp, that we replace the ramp, the structure of the mountain, wasn't real, it was part, was as realistic as possible. That was the biggest challenge, and we went through a few itinerary, a few concept work to it until the filmmaker were happy with it. And then obviously we had to change suspension and tires as well of the bike, so it will make realistic to go on a bumpy road and not just on flat surfaces.
Yeah. And in going back to the entire train sequence, I mean, it's such a huge part of the movie and such a wonderful kind of sequence of scenes. And I love a lot of the work that you've done on the exterior of that, where it's really thinking about, you know, here's this beautiful landscape, but like, how can we add to it a little bit more? Some of the weather elements that come into play, and even just thinking about how can we make the train look like it's moving a little bit faster? And, you know, just again, I feel like you're always just elevating what has already been filmed on screen. And so I was interested in some of the complexities of that as well.
Yeah, it's it was a real kind of sort of mix of different things. You know, we started shooting that sequence. That was one of the first things we started shooting in Norway. And you know, we had a section of track in Norway that the production had leased off the National Railway. And you know, it's quite a long section of track. I think it was around 12 kilometers, was it, Neil? I can't quite remember. Something like that.
It was,
you know, so that,
a bit more,
yeah. So that kind of established the look of the whole sequence. But obviously, because we were shooting for so long, you know, we would then sort of move back to the UK, and we'd be doing work on stages for the interior carriages, and then we'd be doing work, you know, back on the roof doing pickups on the back lot. And then at some point we moved the whole operation out to North Yorkshire, the North Yorkshire moors, to go and shoot some additional work, you know, which I think presented its own logistical problems. And, you know, obviously the terrain doesn't quite match, you know, it was a different time of year. So it was a huge jigsaw just putting all of this stuff together. And, you know, right at the very end, then all of the sort of slow motion train wreck, jackknifing carriages, all of that stuff was all shot on the back lot on a bunch of Neil's big rigs, you know. So coherency and consistency across those different shots was quite complex. You know, luckily while we were out in Norway, we managed to shoot quite a lot of reference. You know, we did a whole bunch of survey work, which enabled us to retrofit, you know, a lot of these other shots sort of into the sequence. But yeah, it was very, very complex. It was a big puzzle.
Very complex.
Neil, what went into building a lot of the rigs for those effects that Alex was just mentioning?
Well, we had a very good previs from Alex's team, which we were sort of, especially for the falling carriages and the tilting carriages. So it was really trying to, you know, get the rig to do what it did in the previs, and then show McHugh where the camera was in conjunction with our rig, and then match it, you know, frame for frame, the previs and our 3D rig that we produced. So everything was, from our side, was designed in 3D, and then once we were happy with it, then we would start the physical construction, you know, once we were happy that we knew we could get the shot. So you know, but it was just a mammoth task, you know, as I say, starting from it was based on a Britannia railway train, but there were slight modifications that we did, but we literally built it almost for real. You know, our version of the train weighed 80 ton. We had a Scania truck engine that was a donor vehicle for when we drove the train off the bridge. That was self-propelled. It was probably the biggest remote control model that I've ever built. And of course, once you press the button to go down the hill, that's it. There's no turning back. So we had one take at it, and that was it. And it all went well. You know, we built the bridge section, which Alex and his team basically camouflaged. We built and we only had literally, I think it was 200 meters to get up to speed. So we knew. I did a sort of a tech viz of weight and motion to figure out where it was going to land. We scanned the quarry where we did it, because obviously I didn't want it hitting the other side of the quarry, and it worked. You know, all our calculations were spot on. You know, McHugh even asked where it was going to land in the quarry, and I put a traffic cone there, and the train hit it straight back right in the middle of it. So I was quite happy with the outcome of that.
That's incredible.
Traffic cone in your house now?
Yes, it's a bit squashed, but it's yes.
It's like modern art on your wall now.
It is, yeah.
Well, I'm genuinely so impressed with the work that you all did. I mean, I think there's a reason that this franchise is so revered for the effects work and the way that it just enhances the storytelling and the journey of these characters. So congratulations on your well-deserved nominations this season, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.